have to let go of their academic knowledge. They have to become willing partners in collaboration with digital learning experts, collaboration with various industry stakeholders. Very often universities are still looking at themselves, inward looking instead of outward looking. We need to collaborate with our teachers, but also with the important stakeholder that is our student. So we definitely have to look at the impact of all the changes that we've made and that we are still to make. Now let's go back to basics. And what is resilience? Resilience is an individual's capacity to respond to stress in a healthy manner so that he or she can achieve goals at the lowest physical or psychological cost. That's where it starts from. But it has gone much further because we are now looking at what was seen as an individual characteristic, and we are personifying it. We are putting it in the hands of an institution which of course is the combination of individuals, but it's much more than that. So we note when we look at the literature on resilience that there are various conceptualizations. They vary very widely. So many see it as a fixed attribute of an individual, and we often neglect the impact of the context being first and foremost the COVID-19 pandemic, but all the other difficult situations many countries of the African continent find themselves in on a regular basis. I like Brewer and his colleagues' definition of resilience. It's a 2019 one, and it was developed specifically for the higher education context. They said that resilience is a dynamic process of positive adaptation in the face of adversity or challenge. It involves the capacity to negotiate for and draw upon psychological, social, cultural, and environmental resources. And technology is definitely one of those resources. Now, I'd also like to go back to a book written in 2014. It's a book on higher education, on how higher education institutions change. And Keza proposed a change model that draws on 6 theories of change, namely scientific management, evolutionary theory, political theory, social cognition theory, cultural theory or theories, and institutional theory. So for this author, effective change requires a multi-theory approach. And I was very happy to hear both professors talking about the multidisciplinary approach. All of us are coming from different backgrounds, but we all bring something to the table, something important for us to work with and to grow from. So embedding resilience enhancement strategies requires changing in, for example, staff's underlying values, assumptions, structures, and processes. And Keza refers to a second order change, which is that which requires staff to reflect on their particular role in relation to resilience and to re-examine their priorities and approaches to teaching and to adopt the role of leader, to become change agents so that student resilience can then be promoted at the different levels of the institution. So I also want to say that resilience, as we noted, may be seen as an innate or a personality trait or characteristic. It can be developed. So it's not something that we have at birth and then that's it, or we don't have at birth and then that's it. No, it's something that we can develop and enhance through direct action. We also need to note that risk is the exposure to a disaster. Resilience is the opposite. It's the recovery of that disaster. So how are we able to recover from the disaster that has been with us and that will probably be with us for quite some time longer still? Now, I also want to look at what Dušek in 2020 tried to look at while addressing organizational resilience. So Dušek documented the definition of resilience and noted that it was different over time. And organizational capacities underlying the 3 stages of resilience, so the meta capabilities of organizational resilience, depend on context. Our context in Southern Africa is different from the one in West Africa, in East Africa, in North Africa. Nevertheless, we must all build resilience. And Dušek also wanted to highlight that resilience is highly complex and profoundly involved in social contexts. So probably societies that have had to overcome many obstacles, as societies, they are more resilient. Similarly, institutions that have had to overcome different obstacles, different challenges, and are working towards finding solutions are probably more resilient than institutions and context where there has been some form of smooth sailing. So the existence of strategic contexts that are knowledge-based and drivers such as the availability of different resources, be they technology or otherwise, social resources, networking, for example, and also the sharing of power and responsibility, all those strategic contexts are extremely important. And I wanted to share with you this visual, which shows that organizational resilience is based on anticipation. But could we anticipate COVID-19? I really doubt. Anticipation and then coping, accepting that there is a situation and that we need to do something, so that we need to action, we need to develop and implement solutions. And then the third big component is that reflection and learning from what we are doing and what we are supposed to do and the change that comes from it. You see that all these 3 major components depend on resource availability, social resources, and power and responsibility. So it's all intertwined. It's all working together. Now, why build resilience? Now, of course, we know that when we increase resilience by preparing ourselves and by following up on major disruptions, that will have a benefit in the immediate and the longer term consequences of whatever disaster. And that goes for the institution, but it also goes for each one of us who have been struggling mentally and many of us also physically during the pandemic. So building resilience can reduce the emotional impact of whatever goes on around us. And I want us to think about what Maha Bali, Professor Bali, has talked about when she uses the concept of pedagogies of care. So resilience discourses champion strategies for mediating and recovering from risk and for identifying and cultivating individual agency and performance. That's what Dean in 2009 said. And I want to add, for identifying and cultivating institutional agency and performance. So at some point in time, we were thinking that digital transformation and technology-based learning was years away. And we thought that, as institutions, we would see, what we would do when necessary. And we were quite relaxed in our adoption of technology. And then comes the big boulder, the COVID-19, which forced us to say we need digital transformation now. So we need resilience now. There is no longer a choice. So the disruptive nature of COVID-19, we know that when we think of, the last 40, 50 years, let's say the whole period after the two world wars, you know, there is nothing that has really provoked us and brought us into action, I think, as the pandemic. So the whole spectrum from childhood, early childhood education to postgraduate study, we have all been tested by this pandemic. And so we need to have a systemic rethink and also a re-engineering of educational and institutional choreographies and along various critical dimensions. Now, how are we going to build resilience? We've started. Many of us have different experiences, and I'm sure that during the high-level panel discussion, more examples will come up. But I wanted to touch upon something that goes along the lines of fostering resilience through wellness. So wellness is, I would say, one of the key points for us to be able to accept that we need can't move. So acknowledging that makes us able to go beyond it. We need to look at wellness resources to build resilience to the various stressors that are in our daily lives. We need to make sure that we have counseling services for staff, for students. They need to be available so that people can get help when they need it. We need to look for role models. Some of our colleagues in the various universities all through the continent have done well, even during the pandemic, have been able to become more resilient. Let us look for them. Let us model them. Let us show and ask them to explain to us what they did to make sure that they can continue as an individual. And then look for institutions that have been resilient so that even there, we can add on to what is already available. It goes through peer support and mentoring and creating a sense of community. So let us not forget those that are struggling today. Let us also identify the struggling people, the ones that have a hard time, and reach out to them, lend a hand, and help them when possible. On this slide, I wanted to show how much all the types of resilience, the stakeholder resilience at the individual level, staff, students, management, work hand in hand or have to work hand in hand with institutional resilience. And all that then goes to the bigger picture, societal resilience. So we need to make sure that those different types of resilience work hand in hand and assist each other, like the wheels of a car, like when we think of mechanics, like the structures flowing into each other. Now, when we look at the characteristics of resilient institutions, which is what we should be doing to learn lessons from them, we need to look at different components: flexibility, communication, the support structures that are in place or that need to be put in place, leadership, and also strategic planning. So resilient institutions, be they resilient to the pandemic or to other political, social, natural disasters, have effective communication channels and a coherent crisis communication strategy. I am fully aware, and you are also, that at the beginning of the pandemic, we were looking up to many of our leaders. And very often, we did not get the communication that we needed to keep going. And I think our leadership has learned from that, has learned that communication is key in whatever challenges come our way. We need to have an established, coherent learning and teaching disruption plan. How many of us have that in place today? Emergency response plans at different levels. Existing flexible blended and digital learning strategies and solutions. And the support to staff, to students. The strong sense of staff and learner community. Have we been able to build those communities? Are we setting up structures to continue building them? Because we're not out of the woods yet, as far as I'm concerned. So when we look at an idea of a conceptual framework of university resilience, I wanted to propose this one, which is based on Abdullah and his colleagues, a 2020 resource. That if we use something that is knowledge-based, if we have resources available, be they social, technological, or any other resources, infrastructural, and we then go through the different stages of resilience, as I indicated earlier, that funnel will lead to us to an increased or an improved institutional resilience. Now, an organization, and I've just taken this visual because I think it's quite interesting, organizations have been looking at the concept of resilience for a much longer time than universities have done, even though we are organizations. So, for example, this top 10 principles of resilient organizations has a few of them that are useful for us as well. Resilience habits is something important. Balancing socialization and privacy. Accounting for different beginnings. You know, many of our universities have had to start almost from scratch with the blended and the online learning strategies, policies, and implementations. Let's not use the waggy finger, meaning let's understand each other and build on whatever person, whatever institution brings to the table and learn from that without saying, no, you are doing something wrong. You should be doing X, Y, Z. Let's embrace, the differences and be inclusive as much as we can when we think of resilience. Embracing synergies. One of the two professors this morning highlighted the principle of synergy, of networking. So what are now the obstacles to resilience construction? And here I'm basing my points on what Doheny and colleagues looked at also in 2020. So you see a lot of very recent resources when it comes to resilience and resilience building. So the most frequently mentioned barriers are lack of time, staff time, but also student time, lack of institutional mandate and buy-in, but also acknowledgement of what people bring to the table. There's the issue of digital literacy or technology-based literacy, which in many cases was very poor, both on the staff side and the learner staff, was very poor at the beginning of the pandemic. We are now looking at higher digital literacy, but we're not fully there yet. We also knew that the digital systems were limited. Many of the academics, because of the fear and the anxiety and the stress they experienced, were actually unwilling to change, unwilling to adapt to the new situations. They were very little flexible. So those are all perhaps obstacles to resilient building. Now I would like to go into a few of the solutions. What can we do to build resilience, on a daily basis in each and every institution all around our continent? We need to look at open education. Open education, which is an umbrella term for some of the things I will look at just now. It encompasses resources, tools, and practices free of legal, financial, and technical barriers. And these resources, tools, and practices can be fully used, shared, and adapted to our local context. So open education, of course, encompasses open educational resources for teaching, for learning, for research. They are shared under public domain or with an open license. We all know about the CC, the Creative Commons licenses. They include textbooks, videos, podcasts, screencasts, courses, modules, complete programs, tests, assignments, software, and it is there for us to share, meaning to redistribute, to retain, to reuse, to revise, to remix. And what is all that for? So that teaching and learning can become more affordable, more equitable, and that will help us building resilience in our various institutions of higher education. Now, we know that there are also the so-called open technologies or open source technologies. And I've put a few examples on our screens, some of which you probably know: WordPress for blogging. You might know Joomla. There are many, many more, and I'm sure colleagues can share even in the chat some of these open technologies that we know. At the beginning of the pandemic, because we needed to have learning management systems, many of us turned towards Moodle, and we have now gained some form of expertise, many of us throughout Africa, in the use of Moodle and in the adaptation of Moodle to our local needs with the various plugins. Many of these plugins are open source technologies. And if we want to build resilience, that is definitely the way we need to go, using those open source technologies. Now I want us to look at a few character traits that maybe are with us already, but that definitely need to be enhanced. And if you look at that little image there, which says there's a young man thinking, they only taught me how to think outside the box. This is what we are telling our learners almost every day. Think outside the box, think outside the box, be creative, be innovative. But then this person, the thinking outside the box, he's taken it so literally. And so he's saying, I'm not trained for circles. So the flexibility there is not gained. And I thought this was a lovely way to look at it. So flexibility seems to be a buzzword. It seems to be a keyword when we look at the International Council of Distance Education, their quality network report, which is dated February 2021. We know that flexibility is an important point. I'm not going to go through the 7 benefits of flexibility or the 7 characteristics, just do with when, where, and how learning and teaching takes place. So flexible learning, over the years, 4 clear representations of this flexible learning have emerged. Flexible learning as an efficient practice, flexible learning as the means of gaining a competitive edge, flexible learning as achieving equity, and flexible delivery. And this is again where the technology base comes in, the use of information and communication technologies for flexible delivery. So flexibility is when, where, what pace, how, for all those involved. That is flexibility. So it's the ability to change or be changed easily according to a situation. We know that in principle, flexible learning should be learner-centered, encouraging greater independence and autonomy. And that then leads to self-directedness. And I'm going to talk to that about that just now. So flexibility is something that can build our resilience, because if we are more flexible, if we easily adapt to change, we are more resilient to whatever comes our way. So I said I was going to link it to self-directedness. Now, what is self-directed learning? And I'm going back to a text. It's actually based on Nowell's 1975 definition of the concept, but Garrison in 97 rearranged the definition slightly, and it's that one that I would like us to look at. So self-directed learning is defined as an approach where learners gradually assume personal responsibility and control of both cognitive and contextual processes. Cognitive being the idea of self-monitoring. Where am I? Where am I going? What do I need to continue my learning process? And contextual processes has to do with self-management. Can I manage my time? Can I manage my resources? Can I manage my learning? And all that is to construct and evaluate meaningful and worthwhile learning outcomes. Now, this, of course, is looked at from the perspective of the student. We want our students to be self-directed. But we also want ourselves as educational stakeholders to be self-directed. And we would like our institutions to be self-directed as a component of resilience. So applying what we learn in a new context is part of self-directedness. Exploring alternatives and making sound decisions is part of self-directedness. And we need this to build resilience. Now I would like to talk to you a little bit on what we did at the University of Eswatini. I know you're probably thinking, well, Eswatini is a small country, you know, the University of Eswatini is maybe not a big institution, but we did put in place important strategies, and we made important interventions that I think all of us can learn something from. So as I've said at the beginning, there was very little communication between management and staff and students, and that was quite disconcerting. But behind the scenes, there was some form of action, some form of movement. So very early on in 2020, actually immediately after the lockdown was instituted, so that was end of March, beginning of April 2020, the Center of Excellence in Learning and Teaching, together with the Institute of Distance Education, where I am based, we received a request from our Vice Chancellor to prepare a training program, and a small group of staff members were asked to collaborate and to start finding ways of supporting teaching staff and students to transition towards online learning. So to build that resilience at that particular level. So when we look at it a little bit more in detail, we note that there were 2 online courses that were set up in particular for teaching staff. And I will talk to you about one of them a little bit more in particular. The second course, TBL 003, focused more on hands-on practice. And all that was accompanied by webinars in which we held question and answer sessions, examples of how to do certain things, and a discussion on a particular topics, especially after participants had had some practical implementation experience. Now, those courses focused first on pedagogy and then went on to combine those pedagogical aspects with the integration of ICTs, with the building upon the technology base. We really wanted to do that in a scaffolding approach. It was socio-constructivist and connectivist in nature, trying to bring together the different competencies and skills that the various members of the team and participants to the courses brought to us. So it was really at an introductory level, giving basic information and opportunities to practice, but also including a lot of food for thought, because we were all in the same boat. We were all facing the same pandemic. We were all trying to find solutions to the obstacles that were thrown our way. So this talks a little bit about one of the courses. So you see that the idea was to communicate and describe pedagogical and design strategies, capacitate participants to develop collaborative online tasks, recognize key considerations when we design an online course, and develop a plan. So this was done in May and June of 2020, and then these were the various topics that were in that one course, and these are the topics in more detail. I don't want to delve into that. I can do that if there are any further questions, but just to show you that putting in place such strategies really is of assistance when it comes to building resilience. And it needs to be done top down, but also from the bottom to the top. There needs to be that continuous interaction between the higher levels of the institution and the lower levels to make sure that everyone is included and everyone benefits from whatever intervention we put in place. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I think I want to just come to this slide, which talks about the changing roles of universities. And this is also something that we need to think about carefully when we look at the future. Disruptions will come our way time and time again. We need to look at the impact they have on the technological tools that we are using, on the rhythm of the teaching and learning, on the roles of the learner and the teacher, on the credibility of the programs we offer. Are they linked to what is needed in industry, in society? So that means we need to recalibrate, we need to re-engineer, redesign the learning models we use. The assessment, a lot of talk has been ongoing on how to do authentic online assessment. This is also something that we need to keep on thinking about. Now, with all that, I'm coming to my conclusion. And my conclusion is that there are many questions that remain. Where are we? All of us are probably at different stages of dealing with the pandemic and finding strategies and models to continue and to grow and to develop. Where do we want to go? We need to be forward-looking, outward-looking. What do we want in 50 years' time, in 100 years' time? How can we prepare for subsequent pandemics and other disasters and challenges coming our way? We know that there are many possible solutions that are coming from the four furthest places on our continent. But they require that we cooperate, that we collaborate, that we are flexible, and that all the individuals, all the the individuals, but also all the institutions, all the societies, all the peoples are flexible. And we need to continue networking just like we are doing today. So among the solutions, but there are many more, there are open education, open educational resources, open technologies. So with that, I hope that I've touched upon some of the main questions, and I hope that I've touched upon some of the possible solutions. Life is not about how fast we run or how high we climb, but how well we bounce. Bounce and get new energy and get solutions from what we've lived through and what we continue to live through. Here are some of the references of the works I have looked at to prepare for today's talk. And with this, I would like to say to all of you, thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening to me. And I really look forward to the discussion that will follow shortly. Thank you all.
Thank you so very much, Professor Ferrara Myers. I hope I got the name right. Indeed, this was an awesome, good one. This was an awesome keynote address. We thank you for that detailed, well-structured, and very informative and insightful presentation. I guess we have a few minutes for questions and answers. We are already 11:20, and so we could allow questions and answers for about some 5 minutes. Is that correct, Madame Nadumo?
Okay, Prof. Thank you. We have 4 people who are our high-level panelists. So they are going to respond to the presentation. I don't know if you could allow me to introduce them, and then we would initially give those 4 people the opportunity to respond to the presentation.
Madam Nadu,
yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 4 high-level panelists who are going to help us to respond and interrogate the topic. The first one that I will introduce, they will not necessarily come in this order, but we will wait to be guided by them in terms of their readiness. Professor Rim Bahat, she's the president of Egypt University of Informatics, former advisor to the Minister of Communications and Information Technology in Egypt. She has a PhD in computer science from Imperial College London, MSc in computer science, and also a BSc in computing and statistics. I'll be brief with the introductions. The next high-level panelist is Professor Clement Jidonu. He's the founding president of Accra Institute of Technology. He's a professor in computer science at Accra Institute of Technology. He has received several awards. He received his doctorate from Trinity College in Dublin. The next high-level panelist is Ms. Suwadu Bugoma. She's a PhD student and researcher at the University of Burundi, East Africa. She's working on a research on assessing the effects of trade liberalization in the East African community. The 4th respondent is Professor Eugene Oke. He's